creating a platform for work during this residency, we've come up with the name of Ingrid, who is sort of a persona, sort of a platform, sort of a fluid concept. I think Ingrid is loosely a her, or maybe a them. It has a sort of personality in relation to this, and we're going to be engaging throughout the residency and with a series of public programming events with the overall theme of systems, which is our Bike Gallery's overall theme for the year. We've broken that down also into weekly sub-themes, which we've come up with, which are, we're in the first week, which is world building, theme of world building, a second week theme of corporation shadowing, a third weekly theme of alien intelligence, which we're calling liminal touch, a fourth weekly theme of nonlinear narratives or shifting chronology, fifth of digital relocation, remote locale, and a sixth of digital labour. So that's just to say we're going to have further events coming up, but our events this week are loosely around the idea of world building or alter worlds. And maybe George can say a little about what he sort of thinks of how Keiken fit into that.
So we've got the amazing Keiken with us today. We've got Tanya and Isabel from the collaborative group or collective, and they do like collaborative world building and like speculative narratives to explore like objective and virtual worlds, and like how we can relate through them in new ways with technology. I think that's a vague summing up. You could probably do it a lot better than me. But we're going to be like talking with them and through some ideas, asking about their practice and like ideas and methodologies that they might have for like building these coherent and beautiful worlds that they do. So we're gonna start off with some questions from the group. The first question is from Yasmin. Do you want to go for it, Yasmin?
Let me unmute myself first. Hey guys, it's really wonderful to be able to virtually meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, sweet. So my question is sort of on your live performance piece that was in Transmedial called Behind the Screen, I'm on the Real Earth. And my first question was kind of, how do you grapple with all the different interweaving elements of the performance? Because you have sort of something that's live, like the body and the performer, and then you also have all the different digital elements. So maybe you can answer that at first, and then I have something to do with perhaps how you thought about the audience participating in all these different elements as well.
Yeah, so it was quite a complicated performance to do, and it also involved quite a large team of us to be able to do it. So there was like me, Hannah, and Hannah's not here, and Tanny, who we mostly do Keiken or run Keiken, and we collaborated with Offworld, who they build plugins into Unreal Gaming Engine, and we had done a previous performance with them using their plugin integrated into Facebook social media. So it would be, you trigger when you press the emojis on or the reaction buttons on a 360 live stream, it would trigger live changes in the world environment, and that was the one we did at ICA. And for Transmediale, we proposed that performance, but actually they don't agree with Facebook. They don't use Facebook. They decide to opt out. So actually then we had to go back and be like, okay, well, let's create our own control, or let's create our own sort of what would that look like? So, and it was a lot of back and forth with Offworld about what's possible, and it was an interesting process because you're actually influencing how their technological development is going as well. So it's through that duality and between the programming and the creative ideas as well. And then we worked with a performer that we've collaborated with a lot called Sophie Mars, whose their practice is to do a lot. They're a dance therapist, so it's often like healing movements through the body. And then we worked with a long-term collaborator, George Jasper Stone, who does CGI artists. Is a CGI artist. But yeah, so we thought, okay, how do we activate the audience to have their own mobile, which you could make a mobile site, and then that would start to trigger changes in front of them. It was quite a short time period, so for us it felt a bit more like a prototype, and we're kind of interested in this idea of how do you make a gamified performance, so using the technology to make it participatory, and what that relationship between the virtual and digital, literally right in front of you, right in front of the audience, and seeing the performer in live motion capture, but moving just behind them another kind of character or extended post-human body connected to them. Tani, you actually coded the controller or the mobile site. Might be nice for you to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, I think you've done a really great job of explaining the performance piece itself, but I think one thing that we were really interested in, and actually it's not just for this particular piece of work, that's kind of in general our whole practice, is we're really interested in pushing the boundaries of immersivity. So in terms of creating a performance with like a live element, like something that, you know, that can be a very visceral experience, but something that we're really fascinated in is how can we get people to engage with the work, and how can we get people to interact with it. And I think it naturally leads us to this kind of wanting to kind of work towards these gamified performances where we can develop like the idea behind the mobile site was that it was this kind of device so that you are actively participating in the creation of the world that is being projected behind you in the virtual environment. And so the idea was that users' interactions were really, you know, they were following a sequence of levels, and each time in each level they couldn't actually progress to the next stage unless they all were actively participating. So there was kind of like the website had an API which connected it to the plugin, so that every time the users pressed on specific buttons, that would trigger changes in the virtual environment. But those changes they couldn't progress unless there were enough people participating and actively trying to like progress to the next stage. And like Izzy was saying, it was really like a prototype in that sense, because there wasn't time to develop the game in a way where you could have kind of forking narratives where maybe if the audience didn't reach a certain level, then maybe they couldn't progress to the next level, or the next level was a different level. We had to kind of follow like a sequential order. But I think for us, we really wanted to try and like create some kind of experience where it felt like the audience, the physical was influencing the virtual, and the virtual was influencing the physical. So yeah, it's very kind of multi-dimensional in that sense, I guess. I'm wondering if that answers your original question.
No, I think that's great. It gives me more kind of info to kind of think about how you guys went through it. And I didn't realize it is a prototype in some ways, but I guess a lot of things are. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, like, I mean, what's great about gaming engines is that you can. I mean, we created the film and metaverse where we built these virtual worlds, but it's always kind of extending, and you can build it in a modular way, or I mean, you have to sometimes adapt things. So it means that your practice becomes so much more modular. So you can go towards all these different possibilities, and it gives possibilities for real time, and so it's completely changing the dynamic of like filmmaking performance. And I think earlier on our practice, we were very interested in performance or participatory works that we actually did a few years before that, this piece called Care Stranding, where we didn't have this advanced technology, but we had a lot of performers in the space, and we're doing almost like a role, like an RPG game, and I think, and trying to test out those dynamics of audience participation in a much more physical way, and I think that could always be a really interesting way to understand how audience participation works. You know, how do you want the audience to feel, how much control do you want them to have, and then you put in the aspect of a technological tool. How does that influence that participation? I mean, it wasn't quite an RP, it kind of was an RP, it wasn't quite a full on RPG game, but that's what we were aiming for. All these experiments or prototypes that you could move into that sphere, but if you're working with new technological tools, you need to be able to test those things out as well. And again, I know that one of your topics for this is non-linear narrative as well. So I think the idea as well is actually the storyline for this piece was the character O from Film My Metaverse. So the film My Metaverse was played first, and then it kind of seamlessly, you've got instructions, and it seamlessly integrated into a live performance. And Sophie, who was playing the character O, who's in the child in the film, and it's almost like a sort of off cut of the narrative, or a fork off. Actually, the work we're now wanting to make, or we're about to start building, we're going to play a lot more with multi-forking pathways. But when you're building work using the methodology of world building, it allows you to go in multiple directions as well, and also collaborating. It allows also collaboration of many people in that space, and you can host multiple voices within that as well.
Yeah,
sounds
great.
Really
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Thank you, Esme. So the next question, let's see. Do you want to go for it, Panya?
Yeah, hi, Keiken. Thanks for sharing the filters with us. I've started looking into them. Haven't got anything clever together yet, but really lovely that you're sharing these tools with us.
Amazing.
Your practice is about experience, and I'd like you to unpack a bit more what you talk about as collective consciousness. So you filters to everywhere, you're very free with this work, and how does the experience of your users then fit back into your process and your work? What do you learn from them? And what is particularly the idea of distributed distribution and time? How does that play together because of the times we're living in at the moment, and the virtualness of it? If you could unpack that a little bit more, would be great.
So I'm wondering where to start. I was thinking maybe like with the first thing you were sort of mentioning about what was it? Was it about experience? And because obviously Keiken is the Japanese word for experience, which is something I guess that kind of underpins our entire approach to collaborating and making work. And I think this kind of stemmed from the very beginning of when we first started collaborating. We were, I guess, trying to just like figure out a way in which we could collaborate, and that started by just figuring out what we were interested in. And I think experience was this main kind of like thing that kept bubbling to the surface, where whether that was through the idea of like what the experience is to make a work, what the experience of a work is, or what the experience of consciousness is. And I think that is sort of like a guiding force behind a lot of the things that we do. We really try and make people question the reality and question the structures of society, and like do something that kind of like pierces their reality, that makes them kind of almost like slip out of their own reality for a moment, so that they can experience something new and have that kind of tangible form of like experience, or like a passage or a moment that they can, because it was physical to them, that they can reflect back on. And I think in terms of the idea of like collective consciousness and how that kind of, what the relationship is between that, whether that informs our work or whether that's like through our collaboration, I think there's like a very kind of, what's the word to describe it? I mean, I think that with the way we collaborate, we're multiple people and multiple minds and multiple voices, and that's all people coming from different angles. So there's always this kind of like mesh of different perspectives to create a really multifaceted kind of outcome or output. And I think we're really fascinated by the responses of others, and we really like to work with other people to be challenged and to have their practices influence and shape our own, and so that we can also, I mean, it's just like the inevitable thing where we have an exchange between different kind of outcomes, or even conversations where there is this level of influence and kind of like exchange, I suppose. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Izzy.
Yeah, I mean, I think at one point we were kind of talking about collaboration also in like an open source way, not in the sense of it's completely open in that way, but it's more like if you have someone come in, the whole hierarchy can change, or there's a fluidity. The roles are very interchangeable, and it's also from that collaboration, it helps to actually grow the entity that is Keiken. So through those collaborations, it's growing both that person and the individually and also collectively, and then they can take things back into their own practice as well. So there's we do a lot of sharing as well when we collaborate with others, and we're very happy to do that and advocate that. And I think I'm kind of going a little bit off, but like I'm going back to this idea of consciousness as well. That's been quite a core interest in our work. And I think a lot of people we don't know what consciousness is. And I think we explore it a lot in terms of challenging perceptions, or so we'll create speculative futures, but we'll reflect on the contemporary as though now is history, to try and have that. Through that method, you're trying to have hindsight, you're trying to think in a different way, you're trying to challenge that as well. And I think,
I suppose you're also through this idea of reflecting on the contemporary as though now is history, it's like trying to create a bird's eye view in which we can objectively dissect things, and kind of like it's almost like separating yourself from the situation and isolating it in a way that you can just be able to dissect it without this kind of, with a more considered approach, I suppose. And I think that's definitely something that we do throughout all our work and through all our methods and processes of world building. And I think, like, especially in the context of today, and all the riots and everything that's been happening in America, I think it's like extremely prevalent to like take this kind of approach where we live in really kind of precarious and quite kind of tumultuous times, and in order to create, in our effort to kind of create speculative futures, it's not just like speculative futures, it's also trying to carve out new worlds and spaces which could be potential and could be liberational, and kind of use technology as an emancipatory tool to try and like carve out new spaces and ways of existing.
And also through that process, and try and challenge ourselves and the audience through that as well, through coming in through that collective critical thinking. And I think it's more, I mean, in terms of what's going on at the moment, and also what's been going on for a really long time, and the complete power inequality and white supremacy. It's kind of we need to think about our futures and challenge and see what's encoded in our like immediate surroundings and our history, and then think about the future towards that as well.
No, I think that's really true, especially like I think it's like what you were saying earlier about like prototyping as well. It's like that sort of like simulation of new modes of being, and yeah, it's really
I think also going back to the prototyping, it's almost like there is a level of like, you know, we do require this kind of participational element from others, so that, you know, we're not just creating a platform in which we can have a voice. It's like it's like by being open and responsive to what other people are saying, so that there is like a commonality and a mutuality of exchange, so that it's not, we're not just designing something that's what we think is important. It's something that's like influenced by what is needed for everyone.
I think Rachel, have you got a question?
It was more kind of like a follow-on question from what you were both saying about opening up these new spaces and ways of existing. And I was kind of thinking about our experience and the responsibility we have. We're going to be having a discussion later on about this in a little bit more depth. And I was wondering if I could ask your perspective and maybe some advice on this, about working in a collective, but also working in this this state of residency. You know, we're not coming to this with a project or a piece of work that's fully formed. It's much more about working through process and you know, working in public, working the working process in public, and the responsibility that we feel as a group towards responding to events that are happening within the world. And I just wanted to sort of ask your opinion on, you know, how do you view like a residency as a model with that as a backdrop? Does that make sense? And the responsibility that's incurred in having like a semi-public you know, platform for a set period of time.
Well, I mean, I think what we've always like drawn from when we've worked with lots of people is like, if we can all come in with my screen just went off. If we could all come in with kind of a mutual respect and critical like discourse, and actually talk about what political or contemporary events that are happening in that particular moment, as in relation to our own practices and how those like intertangle, creating a lot of like discourse as well together. But at the same time, it's, you know, for us as well, we've been trying to reflect and think, you know, about our own practices and about our own ways of working together. I don't think it's perfect, and I think we all need to do that reflection and critique as well of ourselves as individual, as a group, as of society. So it's just asking all those questions, really reflecting, really interrogating it as a group is important.
Yeah, and I think also with the idea of the residency of the model, I think the thing that I find quite interesting about it is that it's not always, you know, it's not always about the outcome. I think you were saying that as well. It's more about the process and the kind of like discovery, and if it's a collaborative practice or a collaborative process, then it is about kind of figuring out or like forming ways of working with one another. And I think that it's actually a really challenging thing to work with one another, because you really have to kind of like set aside your own ego and set aside your own interests, and you have to kind of forge paths where you can find common ground, and sometimes even after you've been collaborating for ages, you still kind of hit blocks in the road where things are different. And I think that I think it's like one of those things that collaboration is kind of like an endless process where you just keep trying to like build and improve on what's there, and even deconstruct and dismantle and kind of deprogram what's already happened, because often you get kind of stuck in patterns or habits which aren't necessarily healthy or useful or productive.
And use each other to be accountable to each other, if that makes sense. So, you know, if keep calling each other out. I think we do that as well. We kind of critique one another or go, hey, I'm not sure about what you said there. And then we kind of unpack it and talk about it. So even though it can be challenging at times, and sometimes you really have a battle with your ego a lot, it can be in the long run, it can be really, really beneficial and, you know, much better than working on your own. Of course, that can be important, and sometimes it is important to be internal and really reflect before you can give in a group. But I guess kind of what you were saying, Tanya, is about what's great about a residency is it's a space where you can completely challenge or reinvent or explore processes or things that you might not be able to when you're leading up to an exact physical show. It's a set time where you're really focusing on these things to learn and unlearn or deprogram, as you were kind of saying as well, and you can do that amongst one another. It's so, you know, and you can put,
and it's almost the perfect sorry
you go Tan.
No, I was just going to say, it's almost the perfect place to do that kind of thing with other people, because it is just, you know, you're not alone, you're being challenged by one another. But another thing I was thinking about is something that we've been kind of dissecting recently, is the idea of emergent strategy, which is it's a term kind of created by Adrienne Marie Brown, who's a kind of activist and writer, and she has a whole book about this. And it's kind of this idea that, you know, through micro actions can have macro impacts. So it's about being really considerate about kind of like what you put out into the world, and thinking about how the trajectory that will follow that, and maybe trying to understand what might happen. And I think it's something that we're really kind of fascinated by at the moment, because it's almost like often it can seem to be about kind of saying something really large and really loud, but actually there's beauty in these kind of like quiet or small moments that can actually kind of splinter off and turn into something that's like, you know, much larger than it initially was. But yeah.
That was really nice.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you can also read, there's The Parable of the Sower, which is by Octavia Butler, which Adrienne like talks about a lot and set as an example of an emergent strategy. And it's about this future where it's a very grim dystopian future, but through these micro actions, the main character is able to make macro impact, which I think is really beautiful and very relevant for today.
I think that's something that I'll definitely bring to our group discussion this evening. Yeah, for
that's
sure.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Oh no.
Yeah. The next question's from me. So yeah, like in your like AR filters and like interactive digital works, and also like I've never been to one, but I've heard in your workshops as well, like you've got a real like essence of like interaction, like working within systems and within people to create this like element of liveness and like living these worlds. Like I don't know, like how how like what am I trying to say here? Like how do you get these, like how do you provoke them, and like how do you like feel about the relationship between like people living this experience in a way? I don't know, like I think it was Rob who's on the residency was part of one of your workshops when you came to Goldsmith. and he was saying like you fully like got them into these like roles and beliefs and things like this, like how do what are good methods and like things for like coaxing people into these, well, not coaxing, that's wrong. You know what I mean?
It kind of was
a little bit, yeah.
That was actually really fun to do. Oh yeah, sorry, you go, Tan.
No, I was kind of starting to think aloud, but and now I've forgotten what I was going to say altogether. But I suppose. Oh no, go ahead, Izzy. You go ahead.
Oh no, sorry.
I'll formulate my thought in my head first.
We're never going to be able to talk about anything, so just like. I don't know. I just started thinking about that workshop, to be honest, because it was actually quite fun to execute. But actually, by doing a workshop where you have to role play a scenario, so I don't know if in the workshop, probably not everyone was in the workshop, no. So what we did, I'll just say very briefly what the workshop was. So we basically with the students, we said I can't remember exactly, but it was randomly allocated into 3 groups, and then we took one group out and went, you're like
the privilege.
The privilege, you're the rent, is it the rentiers or something like that? That was it. And we had a little speaker which said it out loud, and it said, you don't really have to do that much at all. You won, you're the best. And we just gave them lots of compliments. And then there was 2 other groups that were the workers. And then we had different topics, and they had to upload them onto a Tumblr page, and then we were fast forwarding through the years, so it was the time was just going by very quite quickly, and it was impossible to keep up with the tasks that we were giving them, and then there was points where some of the groups were kind of starting to challenge our authority. And then we'd be like, no, it's okay, we're giving you some sweets for your good job, your good work. And then we went, okay, you're all fired, you're replaced with AI. And it was just quite a fun, like, tongue-in-cheek way to talk about, through a kind of group participatory experience, to really firsthand feel the pressure of like late capitalism and the questions of the potential impotence of with workers and what would happen in a post-work scenario. So that was fun. So I think we're very interested in sort of simulation research, so learning through role playing that out. And what we hope to do is we want to keep building our Unreal environments and then having different people go into them in gameplay mode, and that will inform how we keep building onto that world, and also how that will also inform the narratives that we start to create as well. So it's a simultaneous process. If that makes sense. But I can't remember, I've lost track of it. What were you saying about filters, actually?
I was just gonna add, going back to the I can hear myself. Going back to the workshop, that I think this idea that you mentioned, George, about like intra-action, I think it really boils down to like our kind of core interest, which is around this idea of experience, and about the way that you can kind of like challenge someone's reality, and how that can actually make them think about something and maybe act upon it differently, or it's, I guess, like in a weird way, it is this idea of emergent strategy, where it's almost like you poke someone and then they'll go on and do the rest of the things themselves. But I think it's something that we've always been like really curious about, and even it is this idea of kind of like role playing, making someone like feel something. I mean, like in that group, no one wanted to be the worker because they weren't getting to like relax and lay about, or so they felt like uncomfortable, they felt kind of like ostracized.
It's not like showing them the answer, it's like letting them experience. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Experience tasks that they were never going to achieve as well, and also meaningless tasks as well. It was like you have to upload 20 pictures of a dog onto the Tumblr page, and then it was like, okay, time's up. Okay, you didn't meet your target. And even though it was quite fun, it was quite funny. You know, those practical things can talk about larger questions. So I don't know, maybe encourage, if someone wants to, you should try in your residency, you should do a role-playing game to talk about something fun.
So it is like it creates really nice safe spaces and stuff like that. So. What are you going to say, Hazel? Sorry,
I'm not trying to interject. My internet's a bit dodgy, but I was just going to say that really sounds a lot like kind of borrowing from immersive theatre, which I find very interesting. And I think that's something that we can kind of look to on this platform as well. That sort of dynamic of like learning through really putting yourself in a role that you wouldn't get to usually.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting format, and I think it's definitely something that's challenging for, even from our perspective, it's challenging to put yourself in the position where you're kind of directing people what to do, and then it's challenging for the person to kind of, you don't know if they're going to follow your orders or just completely like go off the rails. And I think it's like you were saying, George, it is a bit of a playground and a safe space to kind of enact like a speculative reality, and just it's almost like creating like a hyper version or like a hyper microcosm of something that obviously you're kind of, in a lot of ways, you're kind of generalizing over a lot of things. You're missing a lot of the details, but it helps to kind of create a sense of understanding of a model or a structure or something.
Some insight into what we can't really imagine. Cool. I think got a few more minutes. We've got one really short question, which is from Jingy. Is she here? Okay, I could ask it for her if you want. It is, what makes you to be a collective? Any common goals and interests? I guess we might have had this. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that you feel.
I suppose we sort of spoke about kind of where we initially began with the initial idea of experience, and how we kind of just, I think we didn't really know where we were going to begin with. We sort of just I think we spent actually quite a few years just figuring out what our collaboration meant, and what we were interested in collectively, and how they all how all these different things intersected. And
we all, I think also it's important maybe to say we were all met at university. We were at Falmouth Uni, and we all had individual practices, and we kind of we had appreciation of those individual practices, and then we thought, okay, how do we connect those individual practices together? And then after a while, our collaboration just kind of kept growing, and we also, we tried to get a lot of our friends involved initially, and we just tested stuff out. I mean, even we'd always just I remember the first thing we actually did, it's not great, but we were part of a book fair, and then rather than just selling like zines, we ended up doing sort of performative actions throughout the day. So we're just testing what would that collaboration look like in a performative way. But it took quite a few years of us writing scripts together, making different works. We did a residency as well, which was very helpful, and kind of helped us keep working together. And then our individual practices just started to disappear, and now we're just Keiken.
That's really nice.
I kind of goal that we do have, I think, is we're really interested in this idea of creating this huge, large ecosystem or metaverse of kind of virtual and virtual worlds, but also integrated into our physical world, because we often look at the relationship between physical and digital, or digital way, and to keep challenging also the effects of technology, and to push technology and use technology as an emancipatory tool, because technology isn't always very progressive, and it's actually shaping a lot of shaping our future or how we respond. And we want to be there helping to shape what that digital space would look like by physically using the tools and integrating the tools, and hopefully creating the tools as well. Amongst storytelling, I mean, I think storytelling is always a useful tool to do, and can be very powerful depending what story it is.
Awesome, thank you guys. We're gonna move on to the second section, if that's cool, which is all to do with,
we're gonna take like, I think we're just gonna take like a 2-minute break maybe.
Okay, perfect.
So everyone can just like breathe a tiny bit for 2 minutes, and we'll come back. Literally like 2 minutes, if that's all right.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah, and some of us will be switching out, so you'll be seeing some new faces, and some of us will be heading off. So I just wanted to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, guys. See ya.
Should we
Sorry, can I
Do you
just
wanna-
ask? I think I'm not sure who's not unmuted, who's unmuted, but they've got some background noise. I think it's.
Oh yeah, could everyone just make sure they're on mute when they're not talking? Cool. Rob, you all right if we get started again? Lovely. All right, let's go then. Yeah, so just to give a brief intro to anyone who's tuning in now or anyone who didn't watch the first video, this is a sort of what we're calling a pre-crit session with Keiken, who have come to speak to us about the residency we're doing with Our Bike Gallery as part of their 2020 Theme of Systems. The residency is called Ingrid, which is kind of a persona, kind of a platform, kind of a theme in itself. And this is the first kind of major public event of what will be several over the course of the residency. We're splitting what we're doing into weekly themes. So this fits into our first theme of world building, or alter worlds as we're calling it. And yeah, so keep tuning in to the website, to the Twitch, and there'll be lots more events to come. And if George just wants to say a tiny bit about the work of Keiken again, and then we can get started with some questions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we've got the lovely Keiken with us, joining us again. Second bit, they're awesome, like collective doing collaborative world building, like multi-channel storytelling, doing some like interactive live performances, face filters, exploring like consciousness and big, and like objective and virtual world kind of thing. But yeah, we're going to talk to them more. Do you want to lead this one off, Hazel, with some questions? The topic of
sure, yeah. So yeah, we're looking more at sort of the platform itself and narrative after our previous discussion of liveness and events. And firstly, we have a question from Becky, who I think may have needed to go, but she was asking, what tools or methods do you use for story building or world building? So in particular, whether you use storyboarding approaches, or maybe you produce visuals sometimes and then assign a narrative afterwards, and that's kind of in view of whether you borrow from particular traditions or if you have any specific exercises that you do when you're kind of prototyping. So a little bit into your process, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose I'm just checking I'm not mute. No, I'm not mute. Okay. So I suppose one of the first things that we tend to do, or maybe often what kind of informs the way we start approaching making a work, is we really have this kind of practice or habit even of collective critical thinking. So that often is informed by events that are happening in the contemporary moment. So something that's maybe come up that's kind of very prevalent and we feel is very important and necessary to be discussing. And we're often taking this like approach, we were mentioning it in the earlier session, which is reflecting on the contemporary as though now is history. So we're taking this bird's eye view approach, and it always translates into this way of kind of taking something from today and trying to build or deconstruct something that's happening to create this kind of speculative world. And whether that's happening in kind of like a positive or a negative way, it's actually something that's kind of it's just creating a space for that to exist in, and through the process of kind of developing the narrative is the process in which we actually begin to deconstruct and dissect and dismantle all these kind of contemporary issues. So I think there is this kind of element, a huge element of conversation that happens, and then writing is a really important part of our practice, and we do this completely collaboratively, and it's this kind of way of creating transauthorial narratives in which we are all like, we open up like a Google Doc and then we're all writing in the document at the same time, and kind of there's this quite kind of like dynamic approach of kind of challenging what one another is saying, and then kind of like rewriting over what another one is saying, and like creating space for the other aspects to exist. And it's very kind of I suppose we have this kind of level of dialogue and communication where it's very almost this process, because we've been working on it for so long, it's quite intuitive in the way that we approach writing. And so often someone will come with one idea and that will form into something else, or you know, we each kind of know that we prefer like a different type or a different way of writing. For example, Hannah's very good at kind of thinking about creating structures or narratives or kind of sequences of events, whereas I think I much prefer kind of writing in going into the details and creating like a description of something. And Izzy, I think you come in with a lot of kind of very different like critical opinions of things, and kind of like interweaving all these different ideas and concepts. And I think that our process, I suppose, it in some ways that's not very traditional, but I think we kind of have kind of formed this own way of working to get to the stage before we make something. But I think in terms of whether we're kind of borrowing traditional processes, I mean, I think maybe previously, for example, when we made Film My Metaverse, this was the film we made last year, we had written a narrative for it the year before, and then a year later we kind of translated it into a script, and then we knew we wanted to make it into a film, but we never really actually made film before, so we didn't really know what any of those kind of like traditional processes are. So I think we're kind of making them up as we go along, but I think in some ways that wasn't always the most productive or kind of like useful approach. So I think our methods certainly change each time we do things.
It definitely starts the core start, as you were saying, it's conversation and dialogue and thinking, and also reflecting on our like interactions or what research we come across. So having that almost constant communication. I mean, we just have, I think it's like a Facebook iMessenger or just other different chats, and we're just continually talking with one another on it. So sometimes even things get sparked on there, and then everything is mostly written on Google Drive, so it allows us to work remotely as well with one another, and also it's easy to bring someone else in, because even if they're not physically living in the same place, and obviously more relatable today where we can't physically meet people as much, and then that kind of we do a lot of redrafting, as Tanny said before. It's like we wrote this whole long story, but then simultaneously we're writing a script for the performance Honey I'm Data, which was very research based, but that research really informed the creative narrative that we were writing. And then when we decided we wanted to make it into a film, we then had to keep re-scripting it. And at the same time, we were also making, I think, a storyboard. We're doing drawings, but we're just trying out different processes. We're trying to also create a rough draft of a video as well to find out what we need to make. And also we had quite high production as well, in the sense of we're not always the best at it, and maybe we're doing things taking a long time with it. But I know for that film we had like Hannah made sort of tables of all the assets that we needed to make for all the symbols that we needed to put in, and what were the rules for the scene. But then you're working with other people, so you have to also make sure you convey those things to other people, but also give their creative freedom and be like, what is important to have in that scene, what symbol to help it make sense. So it's constant reevaluation. I think recently we've done a lot of like slides or creative slides to help us articulate ideas when we need to do a proposal for someone as well.
I think also I just wanted to add that actually our kind of all our work is very modular, in the sense that, you know, we start one project and it sort of doesn't just end when we kind of get to an output. We actually kind of, you know, we keep taking certain ideas and certain threads and certain strands, and they they follow off into kind of their own tangents, but they're still kind of directly related in a lot of ways. So I think it's, you know, our approach is quite like, yeah, I guess I kind of borrowing from ideas that have already happened, and then kind of, I think there are even ideas that we've been kind of following since the very, very beginning, which is, I guess, this kind of like different characters or different kind of like tools or devices or
archetypes as well.
Yeah.
Like, we started off actually our early works. We created archetypal characters that lived. I think we all made Twitter accounts for them back then, but at the same time those are societal archetypes. I think that's what we always try to consider, are like characters or the symbols that are put in. I think Hannah is more than me and Tani really interested in and very good at creating the semiotics and the symbolism of those things as well. So we each have different strengths that we bring into the process, and being able to reflect on and discover what was everyone good at, and try and like help amplify that or give support to that is also helpful in collaboration.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. I think there was a sort of another sort of question leading on from that was about project management within that. That was a part of Daniel's question, but I'll just kind of throw it in as part of that discussion, because obviously they're like a lot of projects we're working on are really, you know, vast in terms of time and scope, and thinking about the fact that on this residency we're a large group. I'm just wondering about any more specific sort of approaches or tips to project management on that sort of sustained collaborative practice.
I suppose it's project management is quite it's quite an interesting thing, because in some senses you have to kind of, I think this is something that we always felt kind of challenged by in the past, and maybe things are a bit different now because we've kind of formed patterns or ways of working, but I think previously we kind of struggled with it, I think, because we wanted to kind of create this space where there wasn't a hierarchy, or there wasn't even any kind of defined roles. So we really did everything together, like every little decision, every little step, every little process of creation was kind of, yeah, like done in a very kind of together way, which was really nice, but it's also it isn't also the most productive thing, because you often kind of take kind of 10 times longer to do something, and I think it can be quite a challenging thing as well, because you want to kind of be able to kind of direct and guide people, but without or direct and guide the collaboration in a way that is really supportive of one another and doesn't feel like, you know, someone's kind of missing out on something. And I think with large groups it often ends up being about kind of facilitating things, which is a really important aspect of it, obviously. But I think it is a challenging one, project management. I think it's really about finding out what works for your collaboration, and what kind of is the intention of the project, and also just kind of dissecting how you want to be working together and with one another.
And even if, because sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, and even if there's some people that want to take a bit more of a lead on the project management, because it does take a lot of time, and I think we sometimes felt when we've collaborated with lots of people, we've ended up taking, because also we like to do everything together, we've ended up doing so much project management that we didn't have as much time for the creativity. So it's a bit of a conflict in our practice, I think, but also we have tried to have quite high project management and also production skills so that we can execute what we want. So you've got to think about what is your goals, what do you want to work towards, and what do you need to achieve that, what are the steps, and thinking in a short-term and long-term way. I mean, I guess if you've got a set amount of time, it's what do you want to achieve in that time? Is there a group goal? Are there individual goals that need to be facilitated? Is someone more interested in taking, or a few in that role of facilitating more, and keeping up that it's important to be able to keep up that the communication takes up a lot of time, and I think that is a good thing and able to facilitating collaboration.
Yeah, communication is really key.
It's very key, otherwise it becomes really difficult. I'm trying to think of other things. That I don't know if it's useful. Oh, there's some quite practical things that we've been doing. I don't know how useful they are, but just to try and be, we've been trying to do these models to be more efficient amongst ourselves, so we have more time for what we want to achieve. So we do things like we plan our Google Calendar, so we put in when things are when we're doing things and who we're assigning different tasks to as well. When do we have a working session or time to work creatively? And it is flexible, but actually laying out a structure, and it might change those kind of practical things. It means that you're able to get through a lot more.
Yeah, and sort of, I think also one thing that we've started to do recently is give ourselves kind of time restraints to kind of finish things and kind of prioritize, you know, what actually needs to be done and what's more of a kind of, like has less of a priority. But I think it's, you know, I think it is also really dependent on the kind of the way you want to approach things, because sometimes actually having a structure is a bit reductive, and it can be kind of difficult to work within, and sometimes you actually just need space to be a bit more fluid and a bit more open and a bit more creative and a bit more, well, it's not necessarily saying that structures aren't creative either, but I think it's a bit of a balance of both, I guess.
Yeah, because sometimes you just need a day just to completely talk the whole time and not really and that's really useful, or you just need a day just to experiment. And especially when you're new to working with one another, it can be great to have some structure, but also sometimes that's not, as you were saying, it's not always that productive or like that beneficial.
I think also sometimes when working in a group, it's really nice to kind of also have space from the group as well, because often you can kind of get very into what you're doing and you're following loads of threads and you're kind of like you're very in the middle of it, and it's good to come away from it and kind of like almost like re-engage yourself with other things, so that you can either come back with a criticism or something, or you can come back with fuel to kind of like to like keep growing it and change the direction of it. But I think that's actually quite a nice thing to do, because it is an important part of collaboration, is kind of having that reflection and that thought to contribute, because sometimes when you're just stuck in a group, it gets kind of a bit stale. Isn't the right word I'm looking for, because that feels a bit kind of negative, but like a bit kind of something like that.
And also just
I think I totally get what you're saying about. Sorry, no,
you go.
And I think it'd be good. Yeah, I was just going to say it'd be good to kind of we've got a few more questions about sort of more of the platform focused things. I think that's been maybe we might have time to talk a little bit more about process like towards the end, but we might just kind of move the discussion on towards the kind of more specific things to do with platform. So we have a question from Katie, if Katie is here. Katie is here.
Yes. So I was kind of interested in how you, I guess this is kind of narrative based as well, but how you approach music and soundscapes as a narrative tool.
So I think with music and soundscapes, I think that's something that we've always felt is quite essential to the work we're making, because I think we kind of, you know, we consider that, you know, if you're creating an experience, you kind of need to have, or we want to kind of facilitate all these different things that make an experience tangible or memorable, or kind of create an atmosphere, or create a kind of help to create this kind of energy. And I think it's actually really, really difficult to do that without sound, and because so much can be said through sound and music that just can't really, you know, it really amplifies the whatever it is that you're trying to portray or create, or a situation or a narrative. So I think that's something that we've always really worked with. And I mean, we're really fortunate in the last years we've worked with Khadija on a lot of the kind of scores of our films and the pieces of even the performance. Sorry, someone came in the door. Even the performances that we've been doing, we've worked with them, and I think that's been a really interesting process and journey anyway, because they have their own practice and their own kind of music and work that they've been making, and I think there's a nice kind of relationship between what we've been doing together. But yeah, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that, Izzy.
Well, I think sound, obviously it creates, like, yeah, it's very emotive, and we want storytelling and narrative is very core to our work. So, you know, that's the tool to amplify it. We've always worked with sound designers or musicians to, I think, because we also always want to create immersivity as well with our works. So sound is, you really need sound to be able to do that, I would say. And we're also quite, in our scripts, we like to have lots of different voices as well, for the different characters. So we do a lot of different voice recordings or of people, or we have to do it ourselves quite a lot. Tanny's actually moral compass, which is the self-driving car with psychiatry, and it's just Tanny basically from the and I think actually in that performance, we did at Transmediale, it was quite an auditory piece as well, because the controller, when you press the buttons, a sound came out. So everyone would be pressing the buttons, and initially it was the sound of water. So they're in this dark space and the seeds. So you start to feel like you're in this, you're creating an environment through also the sound simultaneously at the same time. And then we also had one of the scenes where it kind of went, how is your reality doing? So it's this idea of you hearing all around you can create a participatory and immersive experience, and you're hearing everyone going, how is your reality doing? And it's coming from your own phone, and it's all around. So it's also a tool to have sort of a spatial awareness as well, and I think you can do that with sound. So
yeah, I guess it's quite an integral part of the like output of our work is the sound and how that carries the meaning and the narrative.
Yeah, I mean, we've always kind of experimented it. I think when we did Honey and Data, we put microphones which had effects on them. I don't know if it necessarily worked that well, but we're interested in subverting situations. So sound is just a tool, a medium that we want to include in it. But none of us actually make sound, so we always work with people to do that part, even though it's always work. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think often with sound as well, like it's very tacit. Like you're kind of, the experience of sound is very kind of intuitive. It's not so literal in that sense. I mean, obviously when we work with voiceovers or voices, then we're outright saying something to explain it. But I think with sound, it's more about how a noise can like viscerally make you feel something, or can illustrate something without needing to see it even.
Yeah, there's a lot of like narrative built into sound as well. Do you know what I mean? And like chord progressions can make you feel happy or sad with literally 3 notes.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, what's it called, like foley as well, like foley, like when you have sound effects added on as well to like help you understand the story. So if you hear, like for example, the apple drops, but you hear the apple drop into the water and things like that. So those sound effects can help punctuate the story and make it more believable, make the world more believable. So that's also something that we've been trying to integrate into our work. And actually that happened in the performance, because we had, when everyone was pressing a button and the trees were growing in front of you, even that we were like, okay, what would the sound of, what would it sound like to have trees growing? So we had a sound effect of the trees growing, which I don't know where it was from, but you can do those things to to make the narrative more believable, or a bit believable, basically.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think a lot of us have kind of got like a little bit of experience with sound, but not so much sound design, I think. And those are really interesting things to think about. Kind of, I suppose it's kind of the like diegetic, non-diegetic sound in stuff you do as well. So, but I've never really thought about Foley, so that's very, very cool to think about. I think maybe shall we move to a question? Batul, are you ready to ask what you were gonna ask?
Yes, well, a lot of things have already been covered, but I was also wondering about how you conceive of a narrative while allowing for multi-channel experiences within it, and how do you embrace kind of not so tailored outcomes within the narrative space, like randomness or things that you don't predict or script so hardly.
I think we don't like randomness all so much. I think we often have such a we have such a set goal in mind with our narrative, and there's kind of like within the narrative we've created rules and structures and laws, and there are symbols that we kind of want to like uphold in whatever we're doing. And I think we often end up doing a lot of performance, which actually, when you do a performance, it's a live event, so there's already so much as kind of up to chance and what's going to like technically work and what's not going to work. But I think we tend to try and be quite kind of what's the word, like very kind of like pragmatic in the way we kind of approach something. So we'll start with a narrative, and then we'll kind of consider the form and what that medium is going to be. And I think like inherently the way we approach things is like we always use multiple mediums in one go. So we're not just creating a film and a score, we're also creating like augmented reality filters that go as part of this immersive installation that also has a performance. And I suppose our kind of method of creating narrative comes under this kind of like larger umbrella of world building. And that's what that allows us to do, is just to kind of create these laws and structures and rules, and then there'll be like an overarching theme or structure or narrative to that. But then within that, it's like almost like each medium follows like a different kind of like path of the world, but they kind of coexist and inhabit the same space at the same time, but they kind of also exist independently from one another, and so they carry different parts of the narrative and the meaning through that.
It just gives you so much fluidity by using like world building, like it's inherent, it's like so directly linked to narrative, and you can create so many different forking pathway narratives. You can also, if you're creating a world, you can move around with time, you can keep expanding that world. It creates so much maneuverability. And if you want random moments, or like more like moments, just do a performance, because always it's not how you expect it, or just have something where the audience participates, because you're inviting another person or other subjectivity into that space, or to have to change things or to shape that. So I think when you're creating a work, you can always decide what are you trying to say, what is the meaning you're trying to convey, like what things are really important that they're there for it to make sense, but also what things do you leave that are open-ended for participation that could allow change within that. I think as Tany's saying, we have obviously done situations, we've done quite a lot of performances, which does open up new things to come out of that. And of course, within all work, new things are always appearing out of that. But we are quite specific about what rules we want to have in it, and we're like, it doesn't make sense, we don't have that in it, and so we go kind of completely, sometimes to in the creational work, we're just going over the ideas over and over and over and over again until we're happy with it. And then very occasionally, it's like, oh, we've got an idea. Oh, great, that's a great idea. Let's do that. But even within that process, you just have to keep working on it so much. It's quite laborious in a way sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's also definitely challenging working with technology, I think, in this respect, because we often start out with an idea before we've even kind of figured out the tech, or kind of I mean, I think we've taken quite an experimental approach with how we make work, because we didn't, when we started making work together, our kind of skill set in a lot of the things that we actually work on now was like completely non-existent. So we're often we're not really guided by a medium in that sense. We're often like guided by an idea, and then often we're kind of just like hearing about something new that we could be learning, or there's like a kind of, you know, something can only be conveyed in a certain way, and that kind of requires us to like push with the development of those skills to figure out what we're kind of working on. And I actually think that's quite an interesting way that we approach things, because the narrative kind of guides everything, rather than being kind of like confined to a particular medium or outcome or output.
But sometimes even the medium is the message.
Yeah.
When for certain things, we will, you know, through using that medium or creating that, it will sort of comment on that, because you're creating technology or using new technology, so you are physically using it, if that makes sense. So it's also conveying it through the medium you're kind of talking about as well, but not completely. Definitely narrative leads. Right.
Sorry, I slightly got scrambled at the end there, but I got pretty much all of that, which is really, really interesting about your approach to that. I think we've got another question from Yeshwai, who isn't here, was in the previous crypt, but has a question here, particularly about kind of diving a little bit more specific. He particularly likes your augmented empathy project, and kind of looking at how empathy is conveyed through digital means, and whether there's any kind of focus on like specific stimuli to generate empathy, and generally kind of where that focus comes from, and how it can be made to be powerful in the way it is in that project.
Well, I think with augmented empathy, so this is a project that we did recently with FACT in Liverpool, which is kind of we've kind of done the first part, but there's going to be another part kind of slightly later on in the year, when the lockdown has, you know, where things are a bit easier, I guess. But this kind of, that project, I guess, was kind of generated through this idea where we were invited to come to FACT, and we were supposed to be giving a physical workshop with some kind of like young kids, maybe teenage age, I guess. And the whole project was about kind of making augmented reality with them, and kind of challenging them to think about the facts, kind of like the exhibition at the time, the overarching question, which was kind of like, what was it? It was like, what would the animals say? Was that right, Izzy? If I don't remember that correctly.
I'll look it up.
I think it was like, what would the animal say? And it was about, it's the exhibition was kind of covering the topic of you know, imagine in this climate crisis that we're experiencing, like what can you kind of try and imagine a perspective from a different being, or from a different kind of different cross species, I suppose. So this project, that's kind of where the development of the project came into play. And I suppose we were thinking about how with augmented reality, you can physically embody something else that you maybe couldn't before. And I guess that's where this idea of empathy came in, and kind of it's more questioning whether we can use augmented reality as an empathy tool. Can we use it as a device to to challenge the way we've been thinking, or kind of put ourselves in the shoes or a different perspective of something else? I think actually the medium itself is quite challenging, because especially making filters on Instagram, there's definitely this kind of like, on top of this idea of it being an empathy tool, there's also, it's challenged by the medium itself and it being kind of quite a throwaway medium, and kind of being about the selfie and looking at yourself. And I guess that's kind of like the general kind of project in itself. But
yeah, I did. So we were supposed, yes, as you were saying, Tan, we were supposed to go and do these workshops and to kind of come up with ideas for filters, which would later be it was going to be in May or something, it was going to be a performance, or June, we're already past May, but then COVID-19 happened and lockdown, so it ended up becoming actually expanding and becoming an online project. And so we released a different filter each week. Some of them were not actually published, so there was a secret link, because some of the tools we actually used, you can't, Instagram doesn't allow you to publish it. And then fact to the public, but also their own community groups and young people, they got them to try out the filters, and we had different questions relating to it. So it was a sort of research, participatory based project. And I think the first filter, for example, the first two, we used a tool called defamation, which is actually, it's banned in relation, well, it's not, the tool itself is not banned, but it's, you can't actually have plastic surgery filters anymore. Well, they're called plastic surgery filters, ones that enhance imagery, that not enhance negative imagery towards people wanting to get plastic surgery. And of course, it's great to protect people from some harmful things, but this tool wasn't ever really explored, because one of the benefits of this tool is actually you can completely change your face in an augmented reality filter, and actually challenge Western stereotypes of beauty, of what we see, like image. So a lot of what we understand about things is through visuals. So what happens when you start to actually you use augmented reality to change your face? Does that do anything? What does that feel like? So one of the first filter was the chin had loads of lumps in it, and it was kind of this masculine sort of alien type energy. And when we did an exercise, we have to touch your face while looking at yourself and with it, and actually you start to believe that you've got all these different lumps on your cheeks, and then it's sort of questioning your reality a little, your perception as well. And the next one was a sort of more femme alien kind of energy. And the next one the third one was actually taking more based on animals. So we took different fish eyes and then had all the eyes coming off, and then it had, when you open the mouth, that was actually using fish and dolphin sounds. And of course, I think as filters, they can be really fun, and they can be like entertaining. They can also be quite entertaining, and sometimes not even necessarily that meaningful. But it is integrated. It's integrated into social, and it's literally changing. You're wearing something that is changing your physical features. What does that mean? I mean, we've researched a lot into Dr. Natasha Vita-Moore, who is a transhumanist, who's come up with this idea of a platform diverse body. So it's a kind of design that you could live, where you could live. She's a transhumanist, so they want to extend human life and are happy for us to become cyborgs. So you could exist in the biosphere and also in the metaverse at the same time. So you could exist on multiple platforms at the same time. And it's almost like augmented reality filters are kind of, we're not so far from that. They are kind of platform diverse. So how are we also that comes into consideration, are we living already in a platform diverse way, especially since COVID-19, we're online so much. What does that mean for what we think about our own identity, and what does that think about our own also in relation to others as well? So I think, yeah, we were just it was a kind of research-led participatory project, and then we're going to be developing later in the year. We'll still be doing the performance, and we'll be developing some other filters that will be published on Fact as well. And I think we're going to also make a display as well at Fact, especially like onto the street, because especially if people are a bit worried about going into indoor spaces, I think we want to create something so you can still be outside and the safety of being outside a bit more, but still have sort of an immersive experience.
Cool. So that's kind of to watch out for in the rest of the year, hopefully.
Yes, yeah, we'll have to see what happens, but yeah, that'll be, I think, September time.
Okay, great. Well, we'll certainly be watching. I mean, this platform's going to be kind of carrying on until at least September, so we'll have to check in with you nearer the time. I think that's probably quite a good place to leave it, because I think we said we were going to go till 4. So yeah, just thank you so much for all of your insights. I mean, like, I think we've all learned a lot, and kind of in relation to our specific questions, I think we've all had those very, very carefully and considerately answered, and just kind of got a bit of an insight into your world, which is a treat. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Did you have any closing comments, George? Or
I don't know. I was just going to put that up to the group in case they had any burning last questions. I don't know. But I would just like to say thanks a lot. It's been really nice having you. Really good to chat with you both.
No, thanks so much. Thanks for all your interesting questions, and I hope we managed to answer them. And of course, you can always anyone can always message us if you've got anything else you want to ask. It sounds really exciting, the residency that you're doing, and it's exciting that it's quite a long thing as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for your generosity. I mean, I think what we're trying to aim for with the public program, as we said before, is like, you know, not just this kind of being like, you know, talk about what you do and then that's it, but we've obviously learned a lot. We're going to take on board what you've said, and it'd be lovely to just kind of, you know, lightly check in another time to kind of talk a little bit about what we've done with it. So yeah, it'd be lovely to be in touch again. But thanks very much for joining today, and I think that's a good place to leave it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you all.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.